we're working in a bipartisan fashion. We want everybody to understand that the scorecards are meaningful to us, and eventually they're going to be meaningful to the agencies because we're working to attach dollars, both as penalties and rewards to that, because I believe that if you're getting good responses, you ought to be rewarded. I can tell you that I took a visit over to OPM the other day, and the way that we're doing federal benefits is archaic. And we have got to change that, and I'm willing, this fiscally conservative Republican is willing to spend money to get it done. And so this is a critical piece, and with that, thank you both for coming to testify. Thank all the staff. Listen, I know the work gets done many times without a lot of applause, but I want to applaud everybody who's trying to make this work, and I thank the gentleman for his leadership on the Conley-ISA bill.
My friend is too kind, and I thank him. So for our first two witnesses, we have Suzette Kent, who is the Federal Chief Information Officer from the Office of Management and Budget. I think this is your first time before us. Ms. Kent, is that correct? Second. Okay. Well, welcome back. And Carol Harris, who, of course, is the Director of IT Management Issues at the Government Accountability Office. If you would both rise, please. We swear all of our witnesses in here at the committee. And if you'd raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that both of our witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. The microphones are sensitive, so please speak directly into them. Without objection, your full written testimony will be made part of the record. So I would ask you to verbally summarize your testimony as best you can within a 5-minute window. With that, Ms. Kent, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Conley, Ranking Member Meadows, and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. I'm honored to be here to discuss FITARA and technology topics that are of vital importance to empowering agencies to achieve their missions. As you open, FITARA is more than just a law and a scorecard. It serves as a vehicle for how we communicate evolving priorities and a measure to demonstrate progress. This administration continues to emphasize the FITARA goals through the IT modernization goal in the President's management agenda and in the executive order on CIO authorities. Our government's IT policies must be as nimble and iterative as the global technology industry and the changing nature of the threat landscape we're addressing. This intent drove our policy updates in 2018 and 2019. Some of those policies had not been updated in almost a decade. We also sought to update how we measure success. So the Council provided recommendations to GAO and to this Oversight Committee around how we continue to enhance the FITARA scorecard and continue to make it meaningful in driving progress. Additionally, we are focused on making metrics and measures data-driven, publicly available, and continuous through their websites. We made great strides in IT modernization in the last 2 years. I'll highlight a couple of quick examples. Increasing adoption of commercial cloud email from 45% to 72%. That's 1.8 million mailboxes now. We closed 150 enterprise data centers. All 23 Civilian CFO Act agencies have hit defined targets for data exfiltration detection, and 21 have met targets on mobile device security. And our technology modernization fund projects have yielded playbooks and working strategies that can be easily replicated to accelerate agency systems migrations. We've updated policy on high-value assets, identity and credential and access management, cloud smart, data center, and delivered for the first time a federal data strategy with a 1-year action plan. And in May, various agency CIOs, OMB policy leaders, and I met with the congressional staff members of this and other committees to walk through all of those policy updates and how those actually drive progress forward for enhancements. The recently released Cloud Smart strategy is a great example of how we remove barriers. 3 key areas prevented adoption of cloud technologies that were addressed in the update. Security, how we move from a perimeter-based model to a data-centric model. Procurement, agencies had to adjust to these new consumption-based models. And most important, how we address and develop the federal workforce to operate effectively in these new paradigms. It also includes a directive for agencies to develop an application rationalization roadmap. This roadmap is critical, and it defines what can move to the cloud and helps inform the data center needs and helps us define those targets for what will be closed. The CIO Council has recently released the application rationalization playbook to help agencies achieve this task. Since data center optimization is also important to this committee, I'll briefly comment on a couple of pieces of the vision and the new policy. We closely studied the data collected under the original memo, and working with agencies, we identified ways to streamline the closure process and clearly identify facility types that will continue to be needed for agency mission-specific reasons. We included these learnings in the updated policy, which does focus on enabling aggressive closure with specific targets by agency and ensuring efficient operations where a data center is deemed to be a key mission facility that's part of that agency's mission. Last year when I testified to this committee, I highlighted workforce challenges. In any technology transformation, the people that are charged with acquiring, deploying, and operating in that new environment are ultimately the key to the transformation success. And we must invest in providing the experiences that our workforce needs to keep their skills relevant. Next month, we will be celebrating the graduation of our first Federal Cyber Reskilling Academy, and we will have kicked off our second cohort. These initiatives are a way that we're investing in our current dedicated and qualified federal employees to both enhance their careers, but simultaneously address our workforce gaps in the technology area. As the reskilling model proves itself, we hope to replicate it for other skill areas, and we endeavor to make this approach a standard operating procedure, not just a one-time special project. So in closing, our continued coordination with Congress is key to making government modern, secure, and mission-ready. We know that the American people expect our nation to be a world leader on every front, including technology and cybersecurity. In this discussion today, we know that agencies are making progress, but modernization and battling cybersecurity threats are a continuous journey, and there is much more to do. With the support of Congress, we will continue to raise the bar on agency performance and overall empower agencies to leverage technology to enable their mission, to improve the citizen services, and be effective stewards of taxpayer money. Thank you for the opportunity today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kent. When you go back to OMB, you're going to be able to say, I'm the one person in this White House who went to a hearing on impeachment and subpoenas, and nothing like that was discussed at all.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Harris.
Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Meadows, and members of the subcommittee. I'd like to thank you and your staff for your continued oversight on IT management and cybersecurity with this 8th set of grades. Overall, 5 agencies' grades went up, 4 went down, and 11 remained the same. HHS and NASA's overall grades were lowered because their CIOs no longer report to the head or deputy of the agency. This is also the first time in which 4 agencies received 2 grades, which we prepared at your request in response to changes to OMB's data center initiative. I'd like to briefly comment on this and other selected areas of your scorecard. I'll first start with the dashboard and portfolio stat areas. 13 agencies' grades were increased by this committee as a way to recognize the significant progress made in these areas government-wide since Scorecard 1.0 4 years ago. This progress would not have happened to this extent without your scorecard and oversight. I'll turn to FISMA next, which is now included in the scorecard methodology. Its inclusion had a generally negative effect, as there were 12 agencies with either a D or an F. Only 1 agency, NSF, received an A, and 4 received a B. Next, incremental development. This area now captures projects that are not primarily software development in nature, such as a non-IT acquisition with a tech component. This change, which was previewed in Scorecard 7.0, was suggested by the CIO Council and makes this area more comprehensive. As a result, we saw 10 agencies' grades in this area decrease, while 3 agencies went up. And lastly, with respect to data centers, you asked us to show a set of overall grades that use the data center grades from 7.0, as well as another set that excluded these grades entirely. If data center grades were included, HUD and EPA's overall grades would increase, and VA and SSA's grades would decrease. The reason for the 2 sets of grades relates to OMB's changes to its data center optimization initiative. Among other things, OMB's guidance revises the classification of data centers and data center optimization metrics. For example, OMB will no longer require agencies to maintain inventories of their smaller, non-tiered data centers, which make up about 80% of the government's facilities. If these changes are implemented as is, the committee will lose the ability to track and measure progress in this area since the initial scorecard, because the baseline for comparison will have changed. Moreover, the changes will likely slow down or even halt important progress agencies should be making to consolidate, optimize, and secure their data centers. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the overall scorecard. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Let me begin. Ms. Harris, we're here to talk about the implementation of a law, correct?
Correct.
When it comes to data centers, what is the language of the law?
The language says that agencies should have a comprehensive data center inventory.
And what's the goal besides an inventory?
The goal is to consolidate.
Correct. That's the verb. We say, I believe in the law, consolidation and optimization. But consolidation goes first, and it means something presumably other than optimization. Would you agree, since we use both words?
Yes.
Ms. Kent, one of the concerns we have, although your memo delivered to us on June 25th adds some clarity that may be reassuring, but since we got a hearing, our concern is that when OMB gives guidance on optimization and exempts 80% of the data centers from specific inventory plans, you're skirting the intent of the law. The intent of the law was always to identify how many data centers we had, which was a struggle, and then cut them in half, and then cut them in half again. That was the goal. It was set by your predecessor in the early years of the Obama administration, actually. In those days, I think we thought we had 1,600. And so the goal was, initially by the administration, cut it to 800, and my bill said, no, we're going to do that again, cut it to 400. And that's what we put. We didn't put that number, but that was what we incorporated into FITARA. What we discovered was that, of course, what we got really good at was identifying more. And so we didn't have 1,600. We had whatever it was, Ms. Harris, 12,000, 14,000. And so at some point, we thought, well, good that you're getting better at counting. But the goal here is to be more efficient, move to the cloud,
Yes.
Don't have all these little stovepipes all over the place. And I know you share that goal. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about, well, what is it that OMB is doing in emphasizing optimization and exempting from sort of our audit here 80% of the data centers that exist, because we're afraid that whatever your intent, the consequence is we won't capture that and we will not effectuate the savings the law was intended to encourage.
Thank you for your question, sir, and the opportunity to talk about it. And first statement of intent is to comply with the law.
We are relieved.
You referenced changing of various numbers over points in time, and that was one of the components of the analysis, was that there were things that had been included that included thing for printers and weather stations and things that weren't necessarily, MRI machines, weren't actually classified as a data center. So some of the things are trying to address what actually operates as a data center, and we intend to close. And that is very specific in the new guidance. But we also understand, and very clearly from talking with agencies, there are some reasons where we will continue to operate a data center, a supercomputer site, something that is needed for resiliency, special needs of agencies that we believe are very important. And we want to ensure those are being operated efficiently and securely with the intent of this committee. But we also found out something else that's included in the cloud strategy. One of the barriers to making progress around closing those remaining data centers, and the IT dashboard has the target by fiscal year for each of the agencies, and that was developed at the agency level. But in some cases, the application rationalization work is not complete. So they don't have an identified target for whether it's moving to the cloud or what we're going to do with it. So that's the part of the application rationalization playbook that's included in cloud. And you will hear some agencies, they've met their target, they've done a fantastic job, but other agencies have more work to do.
How long have you worked in government?
16 months today.
All right. So sometimes, with the best of intentions and trying to be flexible, we send signals we did not intend to send, and that's our concern. We don't want a rigid, mindless mentality, and everything you said I can agree with, and I know Mr. Meadows could too. But both of us come from private sector backgrounds, and I also come from a public sector management background, and I'm a big believer, and I think I know Mr. Meadows is too, in setting metrics, because that's goal setting. So at the end of the day, yes, we want to be flexible, but what we felt, and I still do feel, we've got to set metrics. So agency X, we all agree you've got 340. And after some consultation, all that, the goal is reduce 100 of them, because the others you need, or cut it in half. Once we do that, let's set that, to hold people to that metric, and we're willing to work with you on that. What we obviously don't want is a circumvention of and a dilution of the goal. And we're nervous optimization gives a lot of wiggle room. And it's easy for somebody to say, I have 3,420 of them, and I need every one of them.
Yes.
Every one is precious, and we're not going to change a thing. Or wait you out, because after all, you've used this weaker word, optimization, which doesn't really require me to do something specific. And so I know that's not your intent, but you hear my concern. And my experience is sometimes you've got to give very clear direction and set very explicit metrics in order to accomplish something.
I hear your concern. I look forward to continuing to talk with the committee, because I think we are being extremely explicit. And actually, in the opening of the guidance, it specifically says any plans to open new or expand have to be approved by OMB, as well as the closure intent is part of their strategic planning and reporting in the capital planning process.
And as I said at the beginning, I'd be more worried, but I think your memo of June 25th does, I agree, it's reassuring in some ways.
Thank you, sir.
Not 100%, but that maybe we're all on the same page. So, all right. I saw you shake your head in agreement about the CIO reporting to the boss, and I want to give you an opportunity, given your title and your position, to maybe talk about that. I think, again, both Mr. Meadows, and I know Mr. Hurd, if he were here, Ms. Kelly, if she were here, our experiences, especially in bureaucracies, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but big, large organizations, who you report to matters a lot.
Yes, sir.
If you report to the deputy assistant under widget manager in the bowels of the basement, everyone can figure that out. And it's how fascinating you've got an opinion about what I should do with my IT, but I'm going to listen to him because he's the assistant secretary or the secretary or whatever he is. When you report to the boss, and everyone knows you report to the boss, that carries weight. And we want to empower a CIO to have that relationship and to carry that kind of weight and make those kinds of decisions. Which I think Ms. Harris indicated that in the case of two agencies, had they done that, they would have had A scores. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. So we're missing an opportunity here. How can we better encourage that org chart and that hierarchy of efficient responsibility so that we're all doing better?
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on that. We do share that concern and are very focused on not just the reporting relationship from the perspective of reporting to the boss, but ensuring that we have technology as a mission enabler, and they are absolutely clear with the direction from the top about what the priorities are, and what set out to be accomplished by that agency. We shared your concerns with the agencies that moved backwards. We had direct conversations with them as well, and appreciate your continued support in emphasizing that both through law, through guidance, and through an executive order, directives, have been issued. We're going to continue those conversations. And I do believe, though, that it's a conversation with GAO and some of the scorecard reporting relationships, there are agencies who have made recent changes. They recognize the intent. I've had opportunity to be with at least 3 of those agencies in conversations with the Secretary and the CIO with clarity around priorities, budget, and resource needs. So we will continue to focus on it. Your support in those that moved backwards is much appreciated.
Thank you, and I have overstayed my welcome. So I know my friend Mr. Meadows has in fact directly engaged in one of these
Yes.
these questions to good effect. Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for continuing to make this a priority. I know this is not our first, second, or third FITARA hearing. It won't be our last. And for both of you, thank you for your testimony. Obviously, Ms. Harris, thank you for continuing with your fine folks at GAO to guide us through on what we believe is will ultimately be a good tool. I don't know that we're there yet, and I think my perspective is that it's a work in progress. And even with the way that we've changed the grading just recently to make sure that some of the unintended consequences are not there. So, Ms. Kent, one of the areas that we've got to be aware of is as we start to see how agencies game the system, and I say game the system in that, it's basically figuring out how the scorecard works and how you can either underreport or overreport to create a better grade, and so we're trying to address that. Getting back to the point that the chairman made just a few minutes ago as it relates to data centers, so I'll give you the cheat sheet. There is nothing more important to him than getting rid of data centers, and he can look at all the scores on this FITARA scorecard, and if you're messing up on data centers, you're going to have a problem. All right, so I just, Ms. Harris, would you agree with that?
I would absolutely.
Yeah. And so in doing that, here's what I would ask for greater clarification than what we have. The word optimization, when we look at that, you can optimize this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're changing anything. And so here's what I would ask is if you could provide this committee with and GAO with guidance on what optimization actually means. I mean, are we looking at 70% capacity on servers? Are we looking at redundancy of X percentage? What does it mean? Because what it means to one agency will be very different than it means, and actually probably should be different for some agencies. You certainly want redundancy in some areas of the government with the need for greater reliability than others. That being said, we need to define that and make sure that Ms. Harris and her team has the proper input. One of the concerns is that the quality of the data that we continue to get is a hodgepodge. And so I need to make sure that gets prioritized if you can. And if you're running into a problem, I think the chairman and I would agree, you just call us. We'll be glad to raise it to the very highest levels within those agencies. I know when Ms. Harris the other day mentioned the direct report for the NASA administrator. I'm one of the few that have had the privilege of knowing the previous NASA administrator under the previous administration and thinking incredibly highly of him and what he was able to accomplish. I also have a personal relationship with the new NASA administrator, and so I sent him a text and just said, listen, this is not good. You're getting dinged on the scorecard. He responded back promptly. We're going to take care of it. And those are the kind of things that I think all of us just want to see, is just that willingness to say, golly, we didn't know it was a problem. especially when you have a transition from administration to administration. But that's the other key point, I guess. And what I would love to see from you, Ms. Kent, is the processes in place that when we change in administration, we don't go backwards. I think there's a real, and it's not a ding on this administration or the prior administration that have, been able to deal with FITARA, but it's a real problem that we are going to have going forward. Is the minute you get a new political appointee in there, if they don't realize that it's a big deal, then we're going to have the same thing with somebody that's here for 16 months saying, golly gee, I didn't know it was a problem. So is that something that you can work with the committee in terms of establishing those for us?
Yes, it certainly is. And I appreciate our ongoing discussions. The phone call from members of Congress certainly seems to assist in getting action. And we would very much like to talk through the details on the guidance on what we are holding agencies accountable when we say optimization. It's some of the things that have been part of the baseline and been defined. And I would add one more point on the CIOs. We are at a point today, and it's reflected in the scorecard for the first time, where we have 22 of 24 that are actually permanent and not acting. And that is, as you look over the history of the scorecard, that's an important accomplishment.
And that's to be
it lets
applauded.
us,
It truly
it lets us move forward, as you have said, and have some consistency as we go forward. So I do look forward to taking those follow-ups back to this committee.
Yield back.
I thank my friend, and I reiterate his offer. Another way of putting it is he and I are Alphonse and Gaston. And I'm not going to say which is which. I'm not going to say which is which. But it's all good. The gentle lady from the District of Columbia, our friend Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a timely hearing, given what we learned was the state of IT, of technology in the federal government, how behind the government of the United States was. So I'm interested in how we're doing in catching up. Now, it looks like we made a decent start. 90 million in funds allocated during that first year. So the first thing I'd want to know, since this is so new, is examples of modernization projects that have been done. What have you done with the money, particularly given reductions in appropriations, which perhaps we could help get if we could have some examples, good examples that speak to the public and speak to the Congress about what you've done with the pretty good start. You had $90 million in the fund I'm interested in is the Technology Modernization Fund.
Yes. I'd be very excited to share some of those successes with you, and I'll frame a couple of things. Just in the time since the board has started, so a little over a year, we've looked at over 50 or approximately 50 proposals that would have totaled almost $600 million. Now, as you pointed out, we only funded a very small set of approximately, that represented $90 million. And those were projects that had not only agency benefit, but all of government benefit. And I'd like to tell you share the success stories of a couple. You will hear later from USDA. One of the initiatives that they undertook was consolidation of multiple portals for farmers.gov to provide and enhance services for things that had been spread out and created an environment that was not only the most effective from customer service, but from farmer facing, but from a maintenance perspective, more costly and less efficient. In the case of HUD, they have 8 applications that are COBOL applications, that are core applications to their mission. And they brought forward 2 of those as a pilot to learn both the tools, the process, and the playbooks to convert that from COBOL to Java and not disrupt the business. And that's a really exciting part of what they are achieving is they've been able to take 1.2 million lines of code and convert it and not disrupt the business.
Well, you know, is this a competitive process? Is this based on who will cost you less while saving you some money in this fund? How do you judge?
That's a great question.
Do they compete against one another or how?
So in what was actually laid out in the law, there were specific intents. Modernization, implementation of shared services, workforce transformation, large, broad-scale transformation. There was also a very important component that the benefits from the initiative could pay back the funds that they received. So not every project actually has, and they have to pay it back in a very specified time frame. Under a definition of a...
Are they doing that, by the way?
They are doing that. They are doing that. This is as I said, we started a year ago, and this is the first time we will have money coming back on schedule as planned. But
Now,
they
look,
have...
your appropriation
sorry?
fell, though, tremendously from that healthy $100 million in that first year to only $25 million in 2019. So given that this was... Excuse me?
Yes, ma'am, it certainly has.
That's a huge reduction. I'm not sure why, but I'd like, since this is supposed to be a full cost recovery fund, how does that work? And are you concerned about the fund's ability to remain solvent?
It is full cost recovery, and I appreciate Chairman Conley's support for the Technology Modernization Fund. We did request additional funds because we saw the worthiness of all these projects coming forward. And in many cases with the agencies, and I would invite you to speak with our team at USDA in the next panel, the agencies were able to accelerate things that they would not be able to do in normal course of business, and they have a payback plan. And one of the other very large benefits that we saw, and I know that Department of Energy, USDA, HUD, and GSA have shared, is that it brought the CIO and CFO communities very close together because they had to reconcile the spend and the payback plan and what the benefits look like in a way that they have never been tasked to do before to ensure that it is cost recoverable. So we very much appreciate
You think you can remain
continued
solvent?
support.
You think you can remain solvent?
Yes, we can remain solvent with that amount. It limits what we can do and the projects we can, we absolutely have the plan for solvency, but it limits the number of projects and the acceleration of modernization that we can do going forward.
That's my concern, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if I can, just before I call on you, Mr. Guthman, if I may, just a quick, Ms. Harris, the fund that Ms. Kent and Ms. Norton were just talking about, Congress created. Originally, we had pretty large amounts of money in mind. That got whittled down and whittled down and whittled down in order to be able to sell the idea of the authorization. Do you believe that we have critical mass, that this fund, as currently funded, is viable, or put differently, can actually make a difference, be the catalyst we intended it to be for people to retire legacy systems?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chairman. With fewer funds to award, the TMF cannot recover as much in their administrative fees. So when Ms. Norton is asking about solvency, we have preliminary analysis that shows that the office's operating costs through FY20 will exceed the administrative fees to be collected from these awarded projects. So our suggestion is for the TMF fund to be fully funded at that $438 million level to continue the good work that Ms. Kent is elaborating on.
I think that this is something we can find some common ground on, and we need to work in the next budget cycle, hopefully together, so we have a number we can all agree on that is meaningful, gives us the criticality we need, and that can incentivize agencies to do the very thing you were describing, Ms. Kent. And finally, just both of you, and I know this is on behalf of Mr. Hurd, as well as all of us, but one of the things we encountered was agencies saying, well, we're creating a fund within our agency to be able to capture the savings effectuated in FITARA, but our lawyers are telling us we can't use them. We can't put money in them because that's an appropriations function. Now, some agencies, I don't think, seem to have that problem, but others do. Just real quickly, do you both believe that we need to fix that legislatively, or can that be done administratively with guidance from OMB?
We believe in some of the cases it has to be fixed legislatively, and there is wording proposed at the committee level. We had proposed some blanket language that would apply to all agencies. That's been turned down multiple times. So we have gone very specifically to individual agencies, and in some cases, through those committees, that has been approved. We have some requests in education is one of those directly at the committee level for various technical enablement of those funds for agencies who don't have a similar vehicle or need to fund or operate out of that working capital account.
Mr. Chairman, I think,
Could you speak up?
yes, Mr. Chairman, when MGT was passed, I mean, the intent was that that transfer authority would be there. So while I'm not a lawyer, I don't, it kind of boggles the mind that you would need additional legislation in order to offer that transfer authority so that MGT could.
I know Mr. Hurd would share your view, and so do I. And I don't speak for Mr. Meadows, but he's here, he can speak for himself. But our view is the law is the law. We passed the law. It's quite clear what the intent is. And to have a sudden hurdle from inside agency attorneys saying, well, no, you can't do that, certainly thwarts the intent of the law. That may not be their purpose, but that's the effect. And so we will do what we have to do, but we would share, I think, your initial reaction, Ms. Harris. Mr. Meadows, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I just agree, and what I'd like to do.
You do agree?
I do agree,
Yeah.
and Ms. Kent, what I would like to do, I think congressional intent was clear. I think general counsels in different agencies maybe are a little unclear in what we believe we were clear about, and so in doing that, some guidance I think would go a long way. And if we need to do a little research and a little push on our end to support that, I'm willing to do that.
I'd be happy to share the specific examples
Yep,
with you and
that-
appreciate your support.
That would be very helpful. I thank my friend. Mr. Khanna, gentleman from California.
Thank you. Well, first, Chairman Connolly, I want to recognize your leadership for having the FITARA guidelines become law and really bring some accountability to technology and government, and want to recognize our ranking member, Representative Meadows, for also his understanding on technology. You know, I represent Silicon Valley, and probably the biggest thing that surprised me when I got to Congress is some of the technological illiteracy in this place. There was one hearing, I'm not going to mention the member, who held up his iPhone and started berating the Google CEO, telling him how he couldn't track the iPhone, and the Google CEO was patiently explaining that Apple made the iPhone. I appreciate, Ms. Kent, your leadership coming from a technology background. When I'm pressed to say what part of the administration I like, I often cite you and Matt Lira, and I appreciated your work on the IDEA Act, which coincides with FITARA and was bipartisan legislation that we all passed. And I would like to know, what is the status of the implementation guidelines for that legislation?
Thank you for your question, sir, and thank you for your kind comments. I'd very much like to tell you about where we are with the IDEA Act, and I was honored to be there with you when that was signed at the end of the year. Our immediate action with all of the agencies was to take the specific items that were laid out in the IDEA Act and determine both the timeline and what things needed to be done centrally and what things needed to be done by the agencies specifically. We met with the agencies and outlined those pieces. Some components were actually part of work that was already underway. things like the inventory that you required and the definition or the intent for a plan for how those would be handled. I know that the report for digital signature acceptance has just come in. So we aligned those things with what was already in place. We also had some items that you will see in some of the budget requests that are coming forward that has to do with those forward implementation plans, and we'd look to do those in the future. I would share one really interesting outcome of the IDEA Act. In inventorying the websites and determining a plan forward, it was very enlightening because many of the agencies said, we need to consolidate this set of websites. So we actually looked at them from priority and a user-centered approach of what was highly used, what was highly valued, and then those things that didn't have the user traffic, wasn't delivering specific services, other reasons, we're actually pursuing a plan to consolidate and close those. So we are moving forward with many aspects of the implementation. They're included in the activities going on now. And there are some pieces for which agencies needed additional resources, and you'll see those reflected in their 2020 budgets.
Grant, let me ask you one final open-ended question. I don't think anyone on the committee would disagree that the United States government is the most powerful institution created in human history. And it was the U.S. government, actually, that helped fund a lot of Silicon Valley. And so it's mind-boggling to me that this incredibly powerful institution has technology platforms or acquisition platforms that aren't up to now what many companies do in Silicon Valley. What do you think Congress can do in supporting FITARA and the IDEA Act to help continue to get us to a place where the United States government should be the model for innovation?
Your question actually aligns with part of the reason that I'm here, and actually believing that same thing, that we should have the capabilities in the federal government that are available across many other industries and set the basis of expectations for our citizens. So when we talk about particularly modernization and cybersecurity as part of the FITARA Act, those are the key components of how we actually make this transformation. Elements of the IDEA Act give us a prioritization to be able to actually take action and shut down and close the websites and rethink how we deliver services. The connected government and delivering mobile and digital services help make those things a priority. Those signals, both through the FITARA scorecard and specific legislation, are helpful. I would also say, though, when you look across at the agency activities for IT budgets, we do, and it's this committee's talked about it frequently, we spend quite a bit on maintenance of those legacy systems. So tools like the Technology Modernization Fund and modernization initiatives that are outside of that basic maintenance helps us drive faster and gives us a way. Otherwise, agencies are moving in small increments for what they can divert out of that maintenance path, and that's not a good solution either.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. And now, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for coming over here. I know you have such a busy day, but I know it's something Congress has been waiting for, so thanks for coming over. Health and Human Services and NASA changed their reporting structures, right? So that the CIOs no longer report directly to the head or even the deputy head of the agency. Can you comment as to why that was done and what your general opinion of it is?
I can comment. I can comment from my conversations regarding that. I would direct you specifically to the agency heads as to why they made that decision. You know, what NASA shared had decisions that were not necessarily related to the activities of the CIO. I think that's in conflict with what we expected. And as you may have seen in the HHS side, they had lots of different moves going on at the time. I am continuing my conversation with them regarding that approach. And
Just seems odd.
we agree, and that is not the intent. So we will continue the conversations until we are back in a place that is reflective of what is expected.
Okay. Ms. Harrison?
I mean, the only thing I would add, sir, is in the case of HHS, that reporting relationship was not codified in their policy. So at the time, the acting CIO also was dual-hatted as the acting chief, or the chief technology officer. And so in that role as a chief technology officer, he had that direct reporting relationship to the secretary. And so when he put on the hat of CIO, he also had that relationship to the secretary. But since he has now vacated that CIO position, because that relationship wasn't codified in policy, it went away. And so that's really drives the important point that this relationship needs to be set in stone in policy so that we can maintain that continuity regardless of who is in the office.
Okay, we'll give you kind of a broad-based question here. From your perspective, but first of all, how long have you both had your positions? I should know that, and I don't.
So could you repeat
How
the
long have
question?
you had your position?
16 months?
Yeah.
Since 2012.
Okay. From your perspective, what worries you the most about IT management, say, the last 6 months? Anything? Maybe nothing. It runs like a clock.
I think from my perspective, when you take a look at the spend of the $90 billion each year on IT, 80% of that spend is on legacy IT. We need to focus on decreasing that number and reinvesting that money into modernizing our aging systems.
It's kind of a shocking number, isn't it?
Yes.
If it was done right, how much do you think you could save?
It is. I think I just commented on modernization that reflects a similar view. I would also state that when you look at our entire set of modernization goals, both transformation of the legacy systems and the ability to sustain current environment while you're making that transformation, and then continued focus, you said, what are the priorities? It is always cyber, and ensuring that we are prioritizing our activities there based on the changing nature of the threat environment and where we see that volume and where we see those types of threats, and ensuring that we're prioritizing that. So when the majority of an agency budget goes to maintaining status quo, that means that agency CIOs have to be incredibly crystal clear on the priority for those funds and their internal resources that are focused on the transformation in cybersecurity.
When we talk about legacy systems, what % of the systems that you're familiar with, I mean, you said how much more money we're spending on the legacy systems, but what % of this, even compared to the private sector, and you must deal with that somewhat, what % do you think do we have in the government that you'd call up to date, or are the same type of systems you'd find in a modern American corporation?
Sir, we don't have that information. We have not done work to look at the percentage of what's legacy and what's development in the private sector. So I wish I could answer it, but I don't have that information.
You guys, can I ask one more question? That hits me as a surprising answer. I feel like I got to ask another question. Do you ever look into and see, compare like where you are compared to major American corporations? Or do you have people begin to work with you and say, holy cow, I can't believe you still have this stuff sitting around here? Does that thing ever go on? Or do you have people leave your organization to the private sector and say, hey, wow, you can't believe what I found out here? There's no comparison or no looking around or no comparing? You don't do that?
I would comment, I don't know that there's an exact number, a comparison per se to a single sector, but I would mention two things that we are looking at. One of the policies that we've used as a driver and a filter for how we prioritize legacy system transformation as well as website transformation has been high-value assets, and looking at those things that are of critical importance to agencies and inside our infrastructure, ensuring that we put resources there first. The other thing that we've done is from a customer experience perspective, actually looked at the citizens that we're serving and had dialogues around what they expect. And that actually does give a comparison in many cases across industry, because their expectations are set on what they experience in their normal lives, whether it's from their financial institution or a retail business that they're shopping with. So we have used that user-centered design and customer expectations to drive back into the way that we are looking at delivering services, both from a digital and mobile capability standpoint.
Okay, well, again, thanks for coming over here. I appreciate the chair letting me take so much of other people's time.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Grothman. And Mr. Grothman, if I may follow up on your question, I think we could afford Ms. Harris to be a little more forthright. I think you're letting yourself off the hook a little bit by saying, I don't know, I'm not in the private sector. I mean, there are things we do know. For example, I always ask, and you probably do too, Mr. Meadows, when I speak to a private sector group, it's a trick question. I go, well, how many CIOs do you have? And they always look at you, no matter how big they are, and like, what a trick question. Well, what do you mean? We have one. Well, how many does the federal government have? When we began FITARA, with 24 agencies, we had 250 people with the title CIO. And that means no one's in charge, no one can be held accountable, nobody's exactly responsible. And that's a big difference, I would say, Mr. Grothman, between the private sector and the public sector, where we can learn from the private sector. Likewise, we were celebrating a little while ago the transition from COBOL. I can't think of a private sector company that still has COBOL, let alone would be celebrating in 2019 the transition from it to something else. So I think there are some things that we clearly can observe and learn from and benefit from in the private sector. Moving to the cloud is another one. So it is instructive, and hopefully we can not necessarily entirely mimic the private sector, but there's a lot of management practices we could learn from. And having the CIO report directly to the secretary of the agency is also something quite common in the private sector. The CIO is not buried in the bowels of the organization. Somebody who is a key part of the management team, because everyone understands the key role of IT in the enterprise.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming. We're going to continue this dialogue. I am pleased, Ms. Harris, that Meritalk did a study, or a survey rather, of 200 CIOs, mostly in the private public sector, and they found that 70% said that FITARA was, in fact, from their point of view, a useful kind of nudge for change within the agencies, and that's kind of good to hear. So, and I see you shaking your head. Would you confirm that yourself, or?
Well, I think that's very encouraging, because I will say that the progress that has been made since the inception of the the FITARA, but then also with your continued oversight with the scorecard 1.0, now to 8.0, how it has evolved and how it has kind of raised the level of improvements across the board has been tremendous, from transparency in the dashboard to portfolio stat in the savings. It's all, because of the tremendous oversight from your committee.
Well, we want to thank GAO also for always being innovative in looking at how best we can make that scorecard a useful tool. So thank you, and to your colleagues. Mr. Meadows.
I just want to make one point. The staff just let me know, when we look at the transition fund, it passed the House today with only $35 million, and when we look at this, it's, we may represent two different District 11s, but we're together on this particular issue. And so what we need to do is work in a bipartisan way to get that up to a number that actually is meaningful. 35 million, sadly, is a rounding error when it comes to addressing this problem.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Mr. Meadows, because I had an amendment to add 15 million to that 35 million to just get a respectable number. And unfortunately, that was not ruled in order. It was subject to a point of order up in rules, so we were not able to do it.
You have better connections with the speaker than I do.
But we will work on it together. Thank you both so much for being here today. And Ms. Harris, I promised you'd make your plane. You're going to make your plane. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Now we're ready for our second panel. Gary Washington, Chief Information Officer of the United States Department of Agriculture. Jason Gray, Chief Information Officer of the United States Department of Education. And Eric Olson, Chief Information Officer from the Department of Treasury. You go right ahead. If you would stand and raise your right hand, we'll be sworn in. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I thank you, and let the record show that our witness has answered in the affirmative. The microphones, as I said, are sensitive, so if you can speak directly into them like I'm doing, you can be heard. Everybody has 5 minutes to summarize their testimony. Your full statement will be entered into the record as submitted. And Mr. Washington, why don't we begin with you and your 5-minute statement. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Conley, Ranking Member Meadows, and the members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to update you today on the United States Department of Agriculture's progress on the implementation of FITARA. I am Gary Washington, the Chief Information Officer of USDA. I would also like to thank you for your ongoing support and commitment to improve information technology management across the federal government. Secretary Perdue's vision is to make USDA the most efficient, effective, customer-focused, and best-managed department in the federal government. Central to that goal is focusing on enterprise-based approaches to management and decision-making. We have taken many steps to achieve that goal, including the implementation of the FITARA Information Technology Management Maturity Model, and we continue to make progress. As evidenced by the latest FITARA scorecard and the progress we have made over the past year, I'm pleased that USDA have moved up an entire letter grade on the scorecard, and I hope that we will be doing as well or better than our friends here at Department of Education next year. I know we have a lot further to go, but every day I am seeing the positive impact that FITARA has on our department, and I'd like to discuss some of that progress today. Since my last appearance before the subcommittee, USDA partnered with the White House Office of American Innovation and the General Services Administration Center of Excellence to improve the management of information technology at USDA. This effort accelerated IT modernization across the department, improving leadership alignment, quality, and efficiency of IT, including decreasing the number of chief information officers, CIOs, from 22 to 1, closing 28 to 39 data centers, resulting in a cost savings and avoidance of $42.1 million, and closing 2,255 data centers overall. We've enrolled 13 agencies into USDA cloud program, resulting in a net cost avoidance of $12.1 million, improving our megabyte score from an F to an A on the 7.0 scorecard by implementing a number of effective processes and procedures to improve software management. We've also petitioned our existing working capital fund to receive technology modernization funding and making significant improvements in cybersecurity, with 96% of USDA systems have authorities to operate, as opposed to 74% in fiscal year 17. Additionally, end-user equipment and hardware will be centrally managed by the Office of the Chief Information Officer using an IT service management system with asset management as a core function. We will onboard the inventory for all the USDA mission areas and offices as part of an enterprise end-user consolidation initiative scheduled to be completed by the end of fiscal year 2020. And our Digital Infrastructure Services Center will be responsible for the central inventory and management of all infrastructure components of USDA, which includes network and system hosting. The system hosting will be accomplished by the end of fiscal year 2020 through the Data Center Optimization Initiative and Cloud Adoption Centers of Excellence. The network transition to the new General Services Administration Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions contract will ensure accurate inventory of our network infrastructure. I would like to emphasize the strong engagement and support for those efforts from our USDA leadership, namely the Secretary and Deputy Secretary, who I report directly to on IT matters. I believe we have an effective reporting structure and involvement in IT management and modernization issues at the highest level. In closing, USDA has consistently proven itself as a leader in embracing FITARA. We want to continue to implement FITARA across USDA and integrate it into our daily processes and IT modernization activities even further than we have today. We recognize there's more work to be done, and we continue to tackle those challenges. I truly appreciate the attention the committee has brought to this issue and your ongoing support of our efforts to change the way the federal government thinks about and manages IT. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Meadows, and members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to talk about the progress the U.S. Department of Education has made in implementing the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act. I recognize the great privilege and honor of being invited to appear here today. Never in my life could I have imagined having opportunities I've had to speak before the United States Congress. Thank you. Would also like to thank you for your continued commitment to improving information technology management. My responsibility is to ensure the availability of IT with appropriate controls and to ensure the integrity in how we use it. Under the leadership of Secretary DeVos and in collaboration with the Office of Federal Student Aid and my office, we have achieved a number of improvements in recent years. There are two areas that I would like to highlight today. Cybersecurity is one focus area of FITARA, which encourages agencies to proactively address cybersecurity risk and compliance with Federal Information Security Modernization Act. To address the cybersecurity challenge, OCIO developed our own cybersecurity risk scorecard based on the National Institutes of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. The implementation of the scorecard improved our focus and alignment with OMB requirements for sound risk management practices for protecting our systems and networks. The scorecard also provided a specific path for the department's system owners and security officers to identify, prioritize, and mitigate risks. From September 2018 to June 2019, the department has mitigated and closed over 2,300 plans of actions and milestones, representing a 72% reduction in vulnerabilities in the department's systems. We use the scorecard to provide monthly briefings to the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and senior leaders. With their support and with the hard work of our system and security personnel, we were able to raise our FITARA security score 2-letter grades to a C in December of 2018. The department, along with the majority of its peers, started with a FITARA cybersecurity score of F in 2018. Another area of focus is IT modernization, which is in line with the department's focus on creating and managing a more modern and secure IT environment and is consistent with the themes and principles outlined in the cross-agency priority goal on IT modernization found in the President's Management Agenda. In 2017, we began an exhaustive review of our IT portfolio to ensure that IT systems, applications, and services are secure, appropriately governed, and modernized to meet the needs of today's economy with an eye towards tomorrow's opportunities. To this end, OCIO worked with key stakeholders across the agency and industry experts to complete a comprehensive analysis of our business missions and the IT assets supporting them. As a result of those efforts, we developed a detailed visualization or map of the department's IT inventory, which we analyzed to determine the department's needs and to build our 5-year IT modernization plan and strategic roadmap. The effort provides greater transparency across the department, enabling us to work with business owners to identify opportunities to leverage shared and cloud services, automate manual business processes, reduce cybersecurity risk, and consolidate cloud service providers. We are working with the Office of Management and Budget and Congress to obtain appropriations language that would allow us to transfer funds to a working capital fund which would support the department's future modernization initiatives and accomplish the goals and objectives of the Modernizing Government Technology Act. We requested this transfer authority in the FY 2020 budget, and the Treasury Department has committed to activating an account for the department once the transfer authority has been granted by Congress. I recognize there are areas for improvement. We must continually monitor and assess our IT management and service delivery practices and policies. We are taking actions in areas where we are not fully meeting our milestones. One such area is CIO and CAO collaboration on the review and approval of acquisition strategies and plans. OCIO is partnering with contracts and acquisition management to establish touchpoints between the IT lifecycle management process and the acquisitions process to ensure the CIO has the opportunity to review and approve all acquisition strategies and plans that contain IT. Secretary DeVos and the department take FITARA implementation seriously. We believe our progress demonstrates that. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gray. Mr. Olson.
Thank you, Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Meadows, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify on Treasury's implementation of FITARA. My name is Eric Olson, and it is my honor and privilege to serve as the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Information technology is at the core of what Treasury does. We represent the third largest civilian agency in terms of overall IT budget and plan to spend approximately $4.8 billion on IT in FY 2019. Managing a large IT portfolio with the scale and complexity of Treasury is a very challenging endeavor, and we are grateful for the financial and human resources we have been provided to accomplish our mission. We recognize our responsibility for the stewardship of these resources, and we take this responsibility very seriously. We appreciate that FITARA was enacted to assist us to perform this responsibility. Our key guiding principle for modernization is to drive the greatest amount of resources towards mission enablement and digital transformation. This requires pursuing enterprise initiatives and shared services so that we can reduce duplication and leverage economies of scale. At the same time, we encourage our bureaus to focus on transforming mission outcomes by adopting practices from the private sector that have proven successful in delivering digital transformation, such as cloud-based services, agile development, and low-code platforms. I would like to briefly summarize some of our recent accomplishments and how they fit into the larger approach for Treasury IT modernization. On the heels of Congress's enactment of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the IRS recently completed a successful tax filing season that was enabled in large part by the successful delivery of one of the largest and most complex IT implementations ever undertaken by the Treasury Department. Implementation of tax form required the modification of hundreds of applications across the IRS and the Bureau of Fiscal Service. This recent accomplishment demonstrates Treasury's ability to deliver change at scale on an accelerated time frame. Treasury continues its pursuit of enterprise-wide services. Recently, Treasury delivered an expansive upgrade to its enterprise HR system, an enterprise-wide service that supports the nearly 100,000 Treasury employees. Treasury is also in the process of implementing a cloud-based talent management system that will deliver a common platform for employee training, performance management, and succession planning. These initiatives demonstrate Treasury's ability to use its franchise fund to achieve some of the benefits of what an IT working capital fund might achieve. In addition to the successes I've mentioned earlier, I would like to report on how Treasury is implementing FITARA. In some areas of the FITARA scorecard, Treasury has scored well. For example, data center consolidation and portfolio review. We have worked hard in these areas, and we are proud of our results. In other areas, although we have worked hard, we recognize there is room for improvement. FITARA recognizes the importance of agency CIOs having a substantial role in agency IT decisions. I meet regularly with Secretary Mnuchin on major IT investments, cybersecurity risk, and opportunities to pursue Treasury-wide initiatives. I believe this increased engagement with Treasury senior leadership has produced notable results in the delivery of the IRS modernization plan and the delivery of technology to support tax reform, among other things. On cybersecurity, we fully appreciate the threat posed by well-resourced and highly motivated adversaries and are committed to mitigating risk posed by such actors. While we cannot completely eliminate risk, we acknowledge our supreme responsibility to proactively address cybersecurity risk to the greatest degree possible. Towards that end, we operate a comprehensive cybersecurity program focused on risk mitigation. Our strategy is to make investments and capabilities that materially reduce our risk and reduce the cost of our compliance. We are grateful to Congress for the support of our Cybersecurity Enhancement Account, which is focused on identifying and funding projects that have the greatest Treasury-wide impact in these and other important areas. In closing, we recognize and embrace our responsibility to be a good steward of IT resources. We understand and embrace the language and intent of FITARA. We share the common goal of Treasury IT modernization, and we value the collaboration with Congress to jointly achieve these goals. Thank you once again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Ms. Harris, did you want to comment? And I'm sorry if I led you astray. I was simply reassuring you you're going to make your flight at 10 o'clock.
I see. I apologize for...
No, forgive me if I misled.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meadows, I'll now turn my comments to the Departments of Agriculture, Education, and Treasury. These agencies collectively plan to spend $7.5 billion on IT this year. For each of them, roughly 80% of their IT spend is on operational systems. Both USDA and Treasury have an overall C- grade on this scorecard, while Education is at a B+. Education has also sustained this overall B+ grade over the last 4 scorecards. Some positive areas to highlight for all 3. The vast majority of their IT projects use an incremental approach. They also have comprehensive software license inventories and use them to make decisions and save money. USDA and Treasury have also closed more than 50% of their total data centers and exceeded their savings goals. Education closed all of their data centers and moved to the cloud years ago. For all 3 agencies, the progress to improve their IG assessments of cybersecurity is rather low. In the case of USDA and Treasury, they also self-reported low numbers in meeting OMB's 10 cyber metrics. The combination of the 2 is a reason for their low grades in this area. Education, on the other hand, self-reported meeting all 10 of OMB's cyber metrics, and as a result, raised their grade in this area to a C. I'd also like to note that if USDA and Treasury CIOs reported to the head of their agencies, their overall grade would increase to a B. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments on the results of these 3 agencies.
I thank you. Thank you so much. And it is heartening to hear the progress. I would just say, and you can confirm this, Mr. Gray, as I understand it, you now have 0 data centers.
That is correct.
And that you went from paying $12 per gigabyte of storage to a few cents.
Actually, sir, we are currently focused on doing cloud consolidation, and we recently, within the last 3 months, transitioned from $1.43 per gigabyte to 12 cents a gigabyte.
So there are savings to be had in data center consolidation and moving to the cloud.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think you're a poster child for doing that, and I thank you. Let me ask, Ms. Harris, GAO looked at best practices, and you identified FITARA requirements, one of which was, in order to get to best practices, obtain support from senior leadership. Would it be fair to say all 3 of the agencies in front of us have achieved that?
Well, sir, I think in the case of education, that's clearly the case because of Mr. Gray's direct reporting to the Secretary. In the case of USDA and Treasury, that direct reporting is not as clear-cut. So I would say that in those 2 cases, that senior leadership support may not be as clear as education's.
And I think that's really particularly important in your case, Mr. Washington, because Secretary Perdue has offered himself up as the pilot for the innovation agenda that Mr. Kushner and Chris Little are organizing at the White House. And if you're going to do that, the model here is the CIO's got to report to the boss. There's kind of no getting around that, and it is the desire and goal and objective of FITARA. It's in our scorecard, and it is part of the best practices GAO established. The second is, and you can comment on that if you wish. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to not let you comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have all the access. I have extreme amount of access to the secretary and the deputy secretary, and I frequently meet with the deputy secretary and speak with him about matters.
But if I may, Mr. Washington, that's good.
Yes.
But that could be personal.
Yes, sir.
We're talking about an organizational chart where you have the right to go in that office because you report to him or her. And if the bureaucracy doesn't see that, it diminishes your power or your successor's power, influence, the ability to make change get enforced because everyone understands you've got the ear's boss, the boss's ear, and you know that works in the private sector. If I know in the private sector somebody has the ear of the CEO, so when he or she calls me, I know who that is. Believe me, I'm paying attention and following up on that as a priority. And so I think that's really what we're getting at. It has to show on the organizational chart. It's great you have access, but your successor may not. And that's we want to institutionalize this in the formal structure of the organization. And Mr. Olson, you indicated that you have access to Mr. Mnuchin, but again, the same thing, is it not, that we haven't institutionalized this, though, so that your successors and his successors will have the same kind of relationship?
So if I could just elaborate a little bit on the arrangement. So by Treasury policy, I do have a direct reporting relationship to Secretary Mnuchin on all CIO matters. I do also have an operational relationship to the Assistant Secretary for Management. And I think that is sort of the element that is causing some confusion or some concern here. This is what I would offer up. I think Treasury has a very robust, I'll say, performance management structure. That structure, which has existed for many years, is the purview and the responsibility of the Assistant Secretary for Management. It has served actually as an enhancer to my authorities as a CIO to be plugged into that and not try to recreate, for example, my own sort of set of oversight, if you will, with all the Treasury Bureau heads and Treasury IT leaders. So it enables me actually to have very good interaction and influence with bureau heads, routinely have the opportunity to meet with them and talk with them on technology matters. It also brings me to the table when, for example, we're talking about a particular bureau's budget or workforce issues with the bureau head, because IT doesn't live in a vacuum. There are workforce issues, there are budget issues, there are procurement issues, and all those folks need to be at the table. So, you know, I do feel like I have that. The other thing I'll say, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, is that we successfully delivered a tax filing season. It was a very complicated, heavy lift. Back a year or so ago, when we were sort of still interpreting the law and creating specific requirements, I started to have some concerns about our ability to deliver that on time, and I expressed those to the Secretary. The engagement with the Secretary led to the ability for me to meet with IRS leadership weekly for the following year. And I'm talking about the commissioner, the deputy commissioners, the CIO, and we sat down and we reviewed the progress of tax reform implementation weekly so that we would get there. I don't believe that would have happened if the rest of the organization didn't understand my reporting relationship to the Secretary.
Good feedback. Well, and it's also heartening that finally IRS is getting the attention it has long deserved. It has been on a starvation diet for all too long, and especially when it comes to technology, some of those legacy systems are particularly characteristic of IRS. I mean, as a Democrat, I'm sorry it took the tax bill to be the incentive to do it, but I'll take it. In any event, thank you. Mr. Meadows.
I'm going to be real brief. Obviously, we're looking at this. We're looking at it in detail. We're looking at what is being said and then what is actually being done. And I think there's a big difference between what is said and what is done. And sometimes what is said here as witnesses is not what we're hearing is being actually done at the agencies. And so I guess what I would encourage all of you to do is look at your FITARA scorecard. And Mr. Gray, I wanted to say thank you. I mean, obviously recognizing success is one of the things that we don't do a good job of doing sometimes. And I know I've been to, I haven't been to your agency. I've been to the other two agencies, and many times it's the first time members of Congress ever come to say thank you, and shame on us. And so I just want to say thank you for your work. Thank you for truly the impact that you're making. And yet we will not spend any more money on any one item than we do IT. I mean, it's, Ms. Harris was talking about $90 billion. When you add all the factors in there, it's probably up to 110, 120 billion when you count in some of the agencies we can't talk about. And when you look at what all of those components, I'm amazed at how archaic our IT system is. I mean, we're spending more than any Fortune 500 company would spend on IT, and yet, obviously, and listen, I'm preaching to the choir. All of you, you get this, and I guess what I'm saying, the big thing for me, the big thing for the chairman is data centers and making sure those are consolidated. The big thing for me is if we continue to spend operational money for COBOL and Fortran programmers and legacy systems that. It's just mind-boggling that we would do it, and we continue to do it, not just in some of your agencies, but in other agencies across this. And so for me, it is, really critical. Mr. Olson, I think about the IRS and the amount of data that you have, and what I would call the big mainframe IBM systems that are really programmed in such archaic language that we're having to pay a premium for the programmers because nobody programs in that language anymore. So in terms of action items, for me, if you would get back to this committee on what is your plan to get rid of legacy systems and what is the cost to do it. And for some of you, you've got to make sure that you're up and running, and you may even have to have a parallel system that gets built so that you can do the transfer. I realize there are logistical problems. Ms. Harris has said sometimes it's like trying to change a tire while you're driving 55 miles an hour. For some of you, it's like you're driving 100 miles an hour trying to fix that flat tire. But I need a plan, and I guess the only frustration you will find is at the next FITARA hearing, if there is not a plan, not just from the three of you, but anybody that is listening on how we're going to get rid of that, there's going to be a problem. I'm tired of talking about it, and that I'm saying that in the nicest way that I can. But thank y'all all for your work. We are making great progress. Even the C's and the C pluses and the B pluses and all of that. Do not take the generosity of a modified scoring as ollie oxen free. it's time that we get serious about trying to get those to at least the next level up. And I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your calling specific agencies so that we could look beneath the surface and see how this is doing. So I'm interested in the scorecard that evaluates agencies for implementation of what is called the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. That's what we mean when we say FISMA. And I think that this metric is particularly important to the Congress because it will enable us to evaluate agencies. We'll have a metric of our own and then to ask the agencies to explain themselves. And that's what I'd like to begin with now. I'm going to ask the Department of Education, who received a C, the Department of Treasury, who received a D, and USDA, who received an F, to explain why and what actions you can take or have taken to improve these scores.
Thank you for the question. Specifically, as was mentioned earlier, the risk and management assessment, the RMA piece, is where agencies are assessing against metrics. We meet regularly to discuss cybersecurity as a whole. As I alluded to in my opening remarks and my written testimony, we use a cybersecurity risk scorecard that was developed that is aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework. And what that does is it enables me to have near real-time visibility into the cybersecurity posture of each of our systems. It reaches back to the Department of Justice in this case to pull information about my systems, and I use that as a tool.
So did you know that, this is Mr. Gray from the Department of Education. Did you know that at the time that your department receives a C? Is that what it would get today, will continue to get?
We are striving to improve our cybersecurity scorecard and have made significant improvements. To your question about what have we done or what are we going to do?
Yes.
Within the last 3 months, we have made a massive IT transition to everything entirely new. When I got to the department about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now, I inherited a 10-year-old IT service contract. There was a lot of legacy and old things. We have recompeted and awarded, and within the last 3 months have transitioned to entirely new equipment, new hardware, new software, new systems, everything.
So if you were evaluated today, you think you would do better than a C? If you were evaluated today, given the improvements you just indicated?
We are currently stabilizing within the next 2 months, but absolutely, once the stabilization is done, I absolutely expect for our scores to improve.
The Department of Treasury, that would be Mr. Olson.
That's correct.
The Department of Treasury got a D. How do you explain that, and what actions have you taken to improve that score metric?
Sure. So, let's talk about the metric itself. Part of it is based on an IG audit.
Based on what?
An IG audit that's done of our FISMA system. So we scored 3 out of 5.
Is that why you got a D?
So 3 out of 5 equates to a D. So, and that's 50% of our grade. And I would be the first to tell you that that's not where we need to be. It's a maturity model, and part of what we've been trying to do and part of what we've been using the cyber enhancement account has been to make investments where we sort of get the biggest bang for the buck to improve these kinds of things. Actually sat down with Secretary Mnuchin to talk about our scores in this area. And he said, Eric, what's it going to take to get to 4? So 4, we have 430 systems. It's a random selection of systems in any given year. So it's like, gosh, that's an extremely heavy lift. But how can we get to 4 on the highest value asset? So he's asked me to put together a plan. How can we get to 4 if we were to be audited on our highest value assets? The other half of the grade, which is the risk management score, as you know, this is sort of like 10 individual items. It's pass, fail. And some of these scores, if you don't get 100%, you fail. So I'm not at all quibbling with the scorecard, but I mean to say that 9 out of 10 of them are well into the high 90s, and we have a 1 or 2% delta, which, we could push it over the line, and we would get, a much better grade. The one area where we're doing the worst in is actually a new element that was added to the scorecard in Q3 of 2018. And we have a lot of work to do. That has to do with bringing strong encryption to to high-value assets, many of which in the Department of the Treasury are legacy systems, which don't lend themselves sort of architecturally elegant ways of doing that. But nonetheless, we understand the ask. We'll figure it out. But that's how I look at raising my score.
So it seems that you are aware, and are taking action. And finally, to round this out, Mr. Chairman, could I ask the representative of USDA, Mr. Washington, about what was the lowest score among the 3 of you here, the F score? How do you explain that? Why that score? And what actions have you taken to improve that score since that you got that score, that low score?
Well, man, we inherited an environment where we had many different tools that weren't speaking the same language in terms of configuration management and patching. So that's where we fell short on the FISMA.
Because you had a variety of tools, did you say?
Yes, we had a variety of tools that weren't feeding the same information. That's where we fell short on a FISMA metric because it wasn't feeding the metric data properly. So what we have done since last year, we've organized the end user consolidation that's very important to us across USDA, and we're going to get down to one common tool, and all of the end user support activities will be managed by the department. So they will have common images, and patching will be done the same way and standardized across the Department of Agriculture. And we intend to have that completed before the end of fiscal year 20.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's
Thank you, and thank you for that line of questioning, because I think that really is something we've got to work on. Mr. Olson, I just wanted to add, with respect to your answer, surely I know you do, understand that part of our intention was if it can't be encrypted, it needs to be replaced. And we're trying to incentivize the replacement of legacy systems.
Yeah,
And that's another nudge.
And,
Yep.
and we have I think you're aware of a large modernization plan we've
Right.
put in for most of that portfolio.
And I would just say to all 3 of you, you represent agencies that maintain very large databases. And I can recall, Mr. Gray, not to cite education, but we had a hearing on this subcommittee a number of years ago, focusing on different federal agencies, and one of them was on yours. And what really was striking was you wouldn't think of the Department of Education being a particular target for bad guys in the cyber world, but you have a database of over 40 million Americans, because if I applied for a student loan, you've got my data. You got my financial data, you got my banking information, my credit cards, my credit history, my mortgage, on and on. And what could go wrong with that if that got breached? So your being up to snuff in terms of cybersecurity is actually pretty important to the American people, and that would certainly be true. IRS has data on everybody, and USDA has all kinds of databases, of course, as well. So, this cyber question is not an academic one. I know not for you, but it isn't for us either. We're very cognizant of what can go wrong if we don't accelerate this move toward updated systems. Ms. Harris, I'm sorry, Mr. Grothman, the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the other three of you for coming over here. I know it's very busy for you, and we're keeping you a little late, so appreciate the extra effort. We talked before about the huge amount of cost that goes into what I think was it Ms. Harris described as legacy systems, and I wondered for each of your three agencies, if we could start with Mr. Washington, could you let us know how many of the systems in your agencies you would describe as legacy systems?
Sir, as in terms of legacy systems, as I classify them as old, obsolete, using
Correct.
outdated technology, we have less than 5 systems that are actually classified as old legacy systems. But we do spend about 77% of our portfolio in terms of O&M.
77% of
Yes.
your money you spend on the legacy systems. You said you have 5 legacy systems left. Of that, 5 of how many?
Right. Oh, how many systems? We have, I'd have to get back to you on the exact number of systems, sir.
About.
We have about 129 systems in U.S.
So you spend 77% of the money on 5 out of like 150 systems?
On operations and maintenance. That's of what we spend on our IT portfolio.
That's almost unbelievable. Could you give me the dollar numbers that go with those fantastic figures?
Say again, sir.
Like how many dollars are we talking about here?
We have approximately a $2.3 billion IT portfolio at USDA.
2.3 billion.
Yes, sir.
And you spend like 72% of that on 5 out of 150 systems?
No, not on 5. That's O&M. On the 5 systems, we don't spend that much money, sir.
Okay, but you said you spend over 70% on 5 legacy systems, is that right?
No, I said for operations and maintenance. On the 5 legacy systems, we plan to retire those this year. And those, don't have the exact numbers right now, but it's just a small amount of money.
Okay, well, sounds kind of amazing numbers. Mr. Gray, I'll give you the same question.
We have one legacy system at the department, which is currently planned to be modernized through the Next Gen initiative that Federal Student Aid is leading.
And when will that be done?
That will be, excuse me?
When will that be done? When will it be modernized?
That is a wonderful question. We currently have contracts that are under a protest, and as soon as those contract protests are resolved, we will be proceeding forward.
What's the nature of the protest?
There's quite a number of that. I'd be happy to follow up after.
Okay, well, we'll give Mr. Olson the same question.
Sure, so I'd happy to sort of comment. Within Treasury, we have 8 or so major bureaus, and I would probably answer that question a little bit for each one. But at the end of the day, the biggest rock in the Treasury Department is the IRS. So let's sort of talk about that one, because I think that one, it's roughly sort of an 80-20 split, maybe 85-15, depending on the year.
What is the 85?
85 is O&M versus what we call development, maintenance, and enhancement, DM&E, which is the build piece. I would offer this. There's been a lot of discussion earlier in the earlier panel about private sector companies. I spend a lot of time talking to private sector companies, and in particular, financial services companies, and ask them this question a lot about how much do they spend on O&M, which in the private sector they call run, and DM&E, which in the private sector they call grow. And they have another category of spend they call transform. It's not necessarily bad in and of itself to have a big number in run, but you have to have a strategy for making the business case is to invest as much as you can in grow and transform. And I will just say, as far as the IRS goes and the big banks that I've talked to, this particular fraction, if you will, percentage, if you will, is not unlike what the biggest banks in the countries see as far as the split between run and build. We have a big proposal and request for funding, that will be coming forward.
When you talk to other people, and I'm
Yes.
already past my time limit here, do they feel you're up to date? Or do they say this is where we were 15 years ago, or what do they say?
They, like us, have an enormously complex set of systems. I mean, so a GAO report just came out. We had, the honorary of a 51-year-old system. 51-year-old system, that's the year it was put into production. It gets down to, I think, what's the definition of legacy? I mean, we joke sometimes in the IT business that legacy begins the day after you implement the system for the first day. So the definition of legacy is something that there's a fair amount of debate on. If I were to take that 51-year-old system and tell you that it's running on a mainframe that's 4 years old, is it a legacy system? There is a variety of factors.
In general, though,
Yeah.
when you talk to people, because I'm way over, my subcommittee chairman's being very gracious. When you talk to people, where do they feel about where you are?
Oh, they absolutely. They say we need to make significant changes, and we're committed to that.
Do they say like we are where we were 15 years ago or something? I mean, you hear some of these stories that the government is so far behind where everybody else is.
I'm not going to debate that, but I will tell you I met with a group of financial service CIOs from some of the country's biggest banks, and it was amazing how similar of the challenges that we had in terms of our portfolio of applications.
Okay, thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Olson, let me follow up on your answers to Mr. Grothman. However, I think it's a little misleading to compare yourself to the private sector. We're kind of roughly the
Absolutely.
same ratio. There is no private sector company I know of
There is not. And
that has a
look,
51-year-old operating system still operating and you're dependent on.
Well, yeah, I'm not trying to defend that.
No,
guess what I'm
I
trying to-
understand. But it goes deeper, doesn't it? So I remember during the Obama years, IRS was so starved that the average computer, the average PC, for example, was in the 8 to 9 year range. In the private sector, any modern company is replacing computers every 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So already we're at a huge disadvantage, and little wonder that we had a lot of hard drive crashes, because it just was outliving its lifespan, and we were really taxing that hardware really beyond its useful life. We also had, for IRS, if you wanted to archive material and be able to retrieve it, the instruction was print and save. Now, there is no private sector company that would accept that as a standard. IRS had to, because we weren't allowing them to invest in their technology. So I just wanted to clarify that in the case certainly of at least your big constituent agency, IRS, it is a victim directly of investment starvation.
Absolutely. And,
Okay.
and I don't mean to, I think I just wanted to paint that it was a more nuanced picture, and we are trying to look at what is a very large portfolio to identify the places where we really need to make that investment and move quickly, as opposed to just painting a broad brush to what is almost a $300 billion spend.
As I said earlier, I've been on this case for quite some time in the IRS. I regret that my colleagues on the other side finally got around to wanting to do something only because they realized their tax bill was at jeopardy if they didn't, because you couldn't implement it. I wish we had made those investments earlier for the sake of serving the American public with or without a tax bill.
Agreed.
And hopefully that will be the ethos going forward. Ms. Harris, anything else for the good of the order? Anything we haven't covered we ought to at least mention?
I think we've covered everything.
We've covered everything.
We have, sir.
Let the record show. GAO believes we've covered everything. But again, I want to thank GAO for your leadership and your incredible staff work from the very top. I mean, this item has been on the high-risk list for a long time. GAO unequivocally got behind FITARA and supported the legislation and exhorted Congress to pass it, and has been with us every step of the way as we insist on its implementation. And we couldn't have done it without you, and I think you're really one of the one of the great heroes of, if this legislation is transformative over time, GAO shares in the credit, and we thank you. Let me see, what am I doing here? You're adjourning, if you would like. I am adjourning. Okay, I want to thank our witnesses, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, and those questions will come from us, and if you can get back to us in a timely fashion through the chair, we'll distribute them to the members should they appear. I want to wish you all a good day. Thank you again for your patience with the House schedule. Good luck in your trip, Ms. Harris. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you, Eleanor.